No assistant survived a month with the ruthless CEO until the stubborn, clumsy girl showed up. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The fluorescent lights in Maxwell Holdings glowed cold and sharp as Lila Reyes stepped out of the elevator, clutching a stack of documents that immediately slipped from her arms and scattered across the polished floor. She dropped to her knees, gathering them with frantic hands. Her palms were already a little sweaty. It was her first morning on the 27th floor, the floor everyone in the building quietly avoided. Across the open office, employees peeked over cubicles with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Someone whispered, "Another one?" Someone else murmured, "She will not last 3 days." Lila swallowed hard. She had heard the rumors too. Every assistant hired for Alexander Hale, the CEO of Maxwell Holdings, had quit before they even reached the end of the month. Some lasted a week. One had lasted only 5 hours. But Lila had no choice. Her mother's medical bills were stacked on the kitchen table at home, and this job paid more than anything she had ever gotten close to. She tightened her grip on the files, stood up straight, and marched toward the frosted glass door with the golden letters. Alexander Hale, Chief Executive Officer. The moment she stepped inside, the air felt different, colder, sharper, like the room itself was holding its breath. Alexander Hale did not look up at first. He sat behind his massive walnut desk, posture perfect, jaw locked, flipping through reports with military precision. The sunlight behind him carved his silhouette into hard angles, emphasizing every bit of the reputation he carried. Ruthless, impossible, unshakable. When he finally lifted his eyes, they were icy gray, cutting straight through her. "Are you the new assistant?" he asked, voice low and controlled. "Yes, sir," Lila said, trying to hide the tremble in her hands. "I am Lila Reyes. I look forward to working with you." He studied her for one long, uncomfortable moment, then closed the file in front of him. "If you intend to quit," he said, "please inform Human Resources before noon. I prefer not to waste company time." The words hit harder than she expected, like someone slamming a door in her chest. Still, she forced a smile. "I am not planning to quit, sir." His eyebrow lifted slightly, almost amused. "They all say that." Before she could reply, a phone rang. Alexander pressed a button, listened for a few seconds, and his jaw tightened. He stood abruptly, and for the first time, Lila noticed the faint tremor along his left wrist as he reached for his suit jacket. A tiny detail, but it flashed quickly through her mind. Stress, exhaustion, maybe even pain. Something human beneath all that armor. "I have a meeting downstairs," he said. "Bring the quarterly binders to conference room 1 in 5 minutes. Do not be late." The door shut behind him with a soft but final click. Lila exhaled slowly, feeling her heartbeat in her throat. Only 5 minutes. She gathered the heavy binders, nearly dropping them again, and hurried after him. She whispered to herself, 3 months. Just survive 3 months. But as she rushed toward the conference room, she could not shake the strange feeling that this job would be nothing like she expected, and that the man everyone feared might be hiding wounds no one had bothered to see. Lila hurried down the hallway with the heavy quarterly binders pressed against her chest. The edges dug into her arms, but she kept moving, determined not to fail on her very first assignment. Conference room 1 was on the opposite side of the executive floor, and every step echoed against the marble tiles like a countdown clock. When she arrived, Alexander Hale was already standing at the head of the table, speaking to 3 department heads. His posture was rigid, the tension in his jaw unmistakable. He did not look at her when she entered, but he reached subtly for his left wrist again, rubbing the spot with his thumb, before placing both hands behind his back. She set the binders down carefully, but one slipped and landed with a loud thud. The room went silent. Lila froze. Her pulse hammered. Alexander finally lifted his eyes to her. They were cold, but not cruel. More like a window with steel shutters behind it. "Please organize the charts by division," he said. "You have 2 minutes." She nodded quickly and began flipping through pages. The numbers and graphs blurred together as she worked. Her fingers trembled, but she forced them to be steady. Every now and then she felt eyes on her, and she wondered if he was waiting for her to break under pressure like the others. When the presentation started, Lila stood at the back of the room with her notebook. She listened as Alexander challenged each director with precise questions, analyzing trends, calling out inconsistencies that no one else noticed. His mind was sharp, almost frighteningly so, but beneath that force was something she had not expected. Fatigue. Not laziness or carelessness, but the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a company and his own pain for far too long. Halfway through the meeting, Alexander pressed his fingertips to the bridge of his nose. The lights overhead flickered slightly, and his shoulders tightened. A flicker of unease crossed his expression. Lila recognized it instantly. The same look her mother had during her worst migraine episodes. She stepped closer and whispered, "Sir, should I dim the lights for you?" The directors exchanged surprised glances. No assistant had ever dared interrupt a meeting. Alexander lowered his hand slowly and turned to her. His expression was unreadable for a long, tense moment. Then he said very quietly, "Do it." Lila reached the wall panel and lowered the brightness. The shift was subtle, but the effect on the room was immediate. Alexander inhaled a slow, steady breath and continued speaking as if nothing had happened. It was the first time she saw him breathe without strain. When the meeting ended, the directors filed out quickly, eager to escape the intensity of the CEO. Lila began gathering leftover papers, relieved that she had survived her first major task. She was stacking the last binder when Alexander spoke from behind her. "You noticed the lights before anyone else," he said. "Why?" Lila turned toward him. He was closer than she expected, his expression no longer distant, but curious. "My mother gets severe migraines," she said. "Bright lights make them worse. You looked like you were fighting one." Alexander studied her again, but this time without the icy barrier he always seemed to carry. "You are observant," he said. "Most assistants only see what they fear." Lila hesitated, then asked softly, "And what do you see, sir?" His jaw tightened. For a second she thought he might shut down again, but instead he answered, his voice lower than before. "I see too much," he said, "and not enough." It was a strange answer, but she felt the weight in it. A man who controlled everything, except the things that hurt him most. He straightened his suit jacket and gestured toward the hallway. "There will be more tasks this afternoon. Take a short break while you can." Lila nodded, stepping aside as he walked past her. As he did, she caught a faint tremor in his left hand again. A small, silent plea his body made without his permission. She watched him go, her heart tightening with a feeling she could not yet name. The rumors had painted Alexander Hale as heartless, but now she wondered if everyone had simply stopped looking closely. Lila used her short break to breathe in a quiet corner of the executive floor. Her hands were still trembling slightly from nerves, but beneath that was something unexpected, a small spark of hope. She had survived the first meeting. Alexander Hale had not fired her. He had even listened to her suggestion. It felt unreal, like the beginning of something she could not name yet. When she returned to her desk outside his office, she found a stack of new documents waiting for her, along with a handwritten note in crisp, sharp handwriting. "Prepare summaries. Deliver by 3 o'clock. She looked at the clock. It was 1:30. Her stomach dropped, but she sat down and started working immediately. The reports were dense, filled with financial projections and legal updates. As she read through them, she began marking patterns, spotting inconsistencies, and writing clear summaries in her notebook. It reminded her of helping her mother manage medical paperwork during hospital stays. Complicated things always made more sense when broken down with patience. Half an hour later, she heard the door of Alexander's office open. She looked up to see him standing in the doorway, one hand braced lightly on the frame, as if steadying himself. "Miss Reyes," he said, "I need you inside for a moment." She stood quickly and followed him. His office felt colder than before, the air conditioning humming faintly. Papers were spread across his desk, and the city skyline behind him glowed a pale silver in the afternoon light. He picked up one binder and tapped the page. "Explain this summary," he said. Lila stepped closer. "The projections dip in Q3 because of the supply delays," she said, "but the recovery line is stronger than expected. There is a potential opportunity to renegotiate the vendor contract. Alexander's eyes shifted to her, studying her face for signs of guessing or bluffing. When he found none, he lowered the binder slowly. "You did all of this in 30 minutes?" "Yes, sir. I have experience organizing complex records." "From previous corporate work?" She hesitated. "No, from taking care of my mother." Something subtle changed in his expression. It was not pity, it was recognition, as if her honesty had brushed against a hidden part of him. Before he could speak, a sudden tightening crossed his face. He pressed his fingers gently to his temple. The tremor in his left hand returned, stronger this time. His shoulders stiffened. Lila stepped forward without thinking. "Sir, you need to sit down." "I am fine," he said, but his voice lacked its usual precision. Another wave of pain hit him. He inhaled sharply, as if fighting to keep control. His posture faltered, and for a moment, the ruthless CEO everyone feared looked unbearably human. Lila guided him to the chair behind his desk. He did not resist, and that alone told her more than words could. She spoke softly. "You have a migraine, do you not?" He closed his eyes, breathing through the pain. "It is stress. It will pass." "No, migraines do not just pass," she said. "You need dimmed lights, water, and at least 10 minutes of rest." He opened his eyes at that, surprised not by her words but by her tone. She was calm, firm, unafraid. "Miss Reyes," he said quietly, "this is not your job." "With respect, sir, it is part of being human," she replied. "Please, let me help." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, to her astonishment, he nodded. Lila dimmed the lights again and filled a glass of water from the small dispenser. She placed it gently on the desk. Alexander took it with an unsteady hand. His voice lowered. "You are not like the others." She smiled faintly. "I have heard that before, sir. But I think you are not like the rumors either." He looked at her, and something in his eyes softened, a thin crack in the armor that had held him together for far too long. She stepped back to give him space, but her heart felt unexpectedly warm. This was the first moment she sensed it clearly. The walls around Alexander Hale were beginning to shift. For the rest of the afternoon, Alexander worked in silence while Lila organized files at her desk outside his office. The atmosphere was different now. Not warmer exactly, but steadier. The sharp edge that usually surrounded him had softened, even if only slightly. Every time the door opened, she glanced up, worried that the pain might have returned. But each time, he gave a small nod as if to assure her he was fine. Near 5 o'clock, she received another handwritten note. "Prepare the client reports in my office. We will review them together." Her breath caught. Review them together. He had never done that with any assistant, or so the employees whispered. Still, she gathered the folders and stepped into his office. The room glowed gold from the setting sun, and Alexander stood by the window, staring out at the city below, as if trying to solve a problem no one else could see. The light cast long shadows along the floor, and for a moment he looked less like a ruthless executive and more like a man who had forgotten what rest felt like. "Miss Reyes," he said without turning, "how long have you been taking care of your mother?" She froze, surprised by the personal question. "Almost 3 years, sir. And you still manage to work here?" "I do," she said, "because she needs me, and because I promised I would not give up." Alexander lowered his gaze to the streetlights flickering awake. Promises are difficult to keep. There was a heaviness in his voice that had nothing to do with business. She stepped closer, unsure why her heart felt tight. "Only when you make them alone," she said softly. He turned then, slowly, studying her with the same measured look he used in board meetings, but this time there was something fragile beneath it, a question he had forgotten how to ask. They began reviewing the reports, standing side by side at his desk. At one point, Lila reached for a document and accidentally brushed against his hand. She pulled back quickly, embarrassed by the contact. "I am sorry, sir." "It is fine," he said, but the tone was different. Not dismissive, not annoyed, almost gentle. She continued sorting the papers, but her fingers shook slightly. She hoped he did not notice. When they finished, Alexander closed the last folder and looked at her fully, as if seeing her beyond the role of assistant. "Your summaries were accurate," he said. "Better than some of my analysts." Lila blinked. "Thank you, sir." "You have a talent for clarity," he continued. "Most people only chase results. You understand patterns." She felt warmth rise in her chest. Compliments were rare from him. But what struck her even more was the sincerity behind his words. He moved to sit, but once again his left hand trembled. It was subtle, but her eyes caught it. "Sir," she asked gently, "has the tremor been happening often?" He stiffened, almost defensively. "It is stress." "Stress does not usually cause tremors like that," she said. "It might be something more." He looked away. "I do not have the luxury of slowing down to find out." Lila felt something inside her shift. She did not know what pain he carried or why he refused to acknowledge it, but she recognized the exhaustion in his posture, the way he held himself like a man who could collapse if he allowed even 1 second of weakness. "You do not have to slow down," she said. "You just need support." Alexander stared at her, and for a long moment neither of them moved. The room felt too quiet, too close, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "I am not used to people staying." Lila's voice softened. "Then maybe it is time someone did." His eyes lowered, not in defeat but in something closer to acceptance, a surrender he did not know he needed. It was the first time he let the silence between them breathe. Outside, the sky dimmed into deep blue. Inside, something small but undeniable had begun to grow. The next morning, Lila arrived early, determined to prepare everything before Alexander stepped into the office. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee for the staff and arranged his schedule with care. The memory of the tremor in his hand lingered in her thoughts, along with the way his voice softened the night before. There was a part of him that was unraveling, not from weakness, but from carrying too much for too long. At 8 o'clock sharp, Alexander walked into the office. His suit was immaculate, his posture straight, but there was a faint shadow beneath his eyes. He nodded to her, a silent acknowledgement that felt strangely personal. "Good morning, Miss Reyes," he said. "Good morning, sir. Your morning reports are on your desk, and your first meeting begins at 9 o'clock. He paused, studying her face for a long second, as if checking whether she was genuinely still there. Then he entered his office and closed the door gently, rather than sharply. Around mid-morning, Lila heard a sound she had not expected. A dull thud, papers shifting, a chair scraping. She stood immediately and knocked on his door. "Sir? Are you all right?" There was a moment of silence, then his voice, strained. "Enter." She stepped inside and found him sitting at his desk with one elbow braced against the surface, his other hand gripping his left wrist. His breathing was shallow. The confident, unbreakable image he projected was slipping. "Alexander," she said softly, without thinking about the formality. "What is happening?" He looked up at her with a mixture of frustration and resignation. "It is getting worse." She took a careful step forward. "Can you describe the pain?" "It starts with the tremor," he said, "then pressure behind my eyes, then dizziness." He closed his eyes briefly. "I have had it for months." "Months?" she repeated, shocked. "Sir, you need to see a doctor." "I do not have time for that," he said sharply, but the strength in his voice faltered. "This company depends on me." Lila felt her heart twist. The world saw him as ruthless, but here was the truth. He was breaking himself to hold everything together. With steady hands, she dimmed the lights and set a glass of water on his desk. "You matter more than the company." He opened his eyes at that, startled. No one had spoken to him like that in years. "Miss Reyes," he said quietly, "I do not know why you care." "Because someone has to," she replied, "and because pain ignored does not disappear." His gaze held hers, and for the first time he looked less like a man of steel and more like someone desperate to stay standing. The pressure in his breathing eased gradually, and he leaned back in his chair. Lila waited beside him, calm and patient. She did not fill the silence, she simply stayed. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low. "There was an accident last year." She froze, listening. "My fiancé was driving," he continued. "There was black ice on the road. I survived. She did not." The words hung in the quiet room like fractured glass. Lila felt tears prick her eyes, not from pity, but from the sheer weight of the grief he had been hiding. "I kept working," he said, "because stopping meant feeling it." Lila placed a hand gently on the desk, close enough for him to see the gesture, but not close enough to make him pull away. "You do not have to face it alone anymore," she whispered. Alexander looked at her hand for a long moment before lifting his eyes to hers. Something shifted there, something deep, a connection pulling them closer without either of them moving. He inhaled slowly, as if her words had given him permission to breathe. Outside the window, the city pulsed with noise and life, but in that office, the world felt still. Something important had cracked open, something that could change everything. For the next few days, Lila noticed a quiet change in Alexander. He still moved with the same precision, still demanded excellence from every department, but something in the air between them had softened. He no longer closed his office door as sharply. He no longer dismissed her observations with cold certainty. And most of all, he no longer hid the tremor when it returned. He let her see it, even if he never admitted it aloud. On Thursday morning, she found him standing by the window again, staring out at the city with a faraway look. The sky was gray, heavy with early rain, and the light reflected faintly against the glass. Lila approached with caution. "Sir, your meeting with the finance team begins in 10 minutes, she said. He nodded, but did not turn away. "Miss Reyes," he said softly, "how did you manage all those years with your mother's illness?" She blinked at the unexpected question. "One day at a time," she answered. "Some days were good, some were heavy, but I stayed because she needed me." Alexander finally turned, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes. "What if needing someone becomes a weakness?" "It is never a weakness," she said. "It is what keeps people alive." Those words stayed between them as they walked to the meeting room. During the presentation, Alexander's sharp mind returned, but Lila noticed every subtle detail. The tightness in his shoulders, the faint pinch at the corner of his eyes, the tremor that flickered in his hand whenever he reached for a pen. After the meeting, they stepped into the elevator together. As the doors closed, Alexander exhaled a shallow, uneven breath and braced one hand on the wall. "Is it happening again?" Lila asked. "Just a moment of dizziness," he said, but his voice wavered. Without hesitation, she moved closer, steadying him with gentle but firm support. For the first time, he did not resist. He let himself lean into her presence, just enough to stay balanced. The elevator hummed softly around them, the world shrinking to a quiet, fragile space. When the doors opened, she guided him carefully into the hallway. He straightened slowly, running a hand through his hair as if trying to regain the pieces of himself. "I apologize," he said. "You should not have to see that." "You do not have to apologize for being human," she replied. "Pain does not make you less, it makes you real." He looked at her, and she could feel his defenses lowering again, piece by piece. Something unspoken passed between them, not romantic yet, but undeniably intimate. Later that afternoon, she brought him a cup of warm ginger tea. It was the same blend she made for her mother during difficult nights. She set it on his desk. "This might help with the pressure behind your eyes," she said. He lifted the cup, hesitated, and then looked at her with a softness she had never imagined he was capable of. "Thank you, Lila." He used her first name, not out of authority, but out of trust. She felt her breath catch, not because of the word itself, but because of the way he said it, as if her presence had become a part of his stability. Outside, the rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the distance between them grew smaller with every minute. Lila did not know what to call this connection yet, but she knew it was becoming something that neither of them could ignore. By the end of the week, the office had begun to notice the quiet shift between Alexander and Lila. Nothing inappropriate, nothing dramatic, but the kind of subtle change only people who paid attention could sense. Alexander was still strict, still precise, but he no longer barked orders the way he used to. He listened, he paused, and every so often he glanced toward his assistant's desk, as if checking that she was still there. Lila tried to ignore the whispering, but she could feel it whenever she walked through the halls. Employees watched her with curiosity, some with sympathy, a few with suspicion. No one had lasted long before, and her presence unsettled the stories they had built around their unreachable CEO. Late Friday afternoon, as she was returning from the supply room with a stack of fresh paper, she passed two managers speaking in low voices near the stairwell. "That new assistant is getting too close," one of them muttered. "You saw how he spoke to her during the meeting." "He never speaks to anyone that way," the other replied. The board will not like it. They have been waiting for a reason to challenge his leadership. Lila's steps slowed. A chill ran through her chest. Challenge his leadership? Because he showed a little humanity? She kept walking to avoid being noticed, but the unease stayed with her long after she returned to her desk. Alexander was fighting something much deeper than migraines and tremors. There were people in the company who wanted him to fail. She had seen it in the files he pushed himself to correct, the long nights he worked, the exhaustion in his posture when he thought no one was looking. Near 6 o'clock, Alexander stepped out of his office with his jacket slung over his arm. His face was pale again, the tension behind his eyes visible. He stopped at her desk. "Miss Reyes," he said, "take the evening off. You have done enough for today." His voice sounded tired, more tired than he wanted to admit. "Are you heading home, sir?" she asked carefully. "For a few hours," he said. "Then I will return." She frowned. "Sir, that is not rest." He looked at her, and she could see the conflict in him, the part that wanted to keep going and the part that desperately needed to stop. "Alexander," she said softly, "you need a real break." He held her gaze for a moment but said nothing. Then he turned to the elevator. She watched him walk away, her worry growing with each step he took. Just as the doors closed, a shadow appeared at the end of the hallway. A tall man in a dark suit, someone Lila had seen in board meetings but had never spoken to. He watched the elevator with a calculating expression before shifting his gaze toward her. Their eyes met for a brief second. His stare was sharp, assessing, almost accusing. Then he walked away without a word. A knot formed in Lila's stomach. Someone was paying close attention, someone who did not approve of the way Alexander was changing, someone who might be waiting for the right moment to use it against him. Lila sat down slowly, her heart heavy. Until now, she had been focused on helping Alexander manage his pain. But this was something different. This was danger. And she was no longer sure how much time they had before it reached him. The following Monday began with an unusual tension in the air. Lila felt it the moment she stepped onto the executive floor. Conversations stopped when she walked by, and people who had smiled politely before now looked away quickly. Something had shifted over the weekend, something she did not understand yet. Alexander arrived shortly after. His face was composed, but the faint strain in his expression told her that the pain had returned, even if he tried to hide it. He handed her a folder before entering his office. "Prepare these for the board meeting at 3 o'clock, he said. "Accuracy is important." "Yes, sir," she replied, but he was already closing the door. Lila settled at her desk and opened the folder. Inside were financial projections, legal notices, and a copy of a recent internal audit. As she studied the numbers, her pulse quickened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Several entries were deliberately altered, amounts shifted, signatures forged. It was not a mistake. This was sabotage. She remembered the two managers whispering near the stairwell. She remembered the board member who watched Alexander leave on Friday with cold scrutiny. Her chest tightened. Someone was actively trying to push Alexander out, and they were doing it with documents he might unknowingly present today. Lila stood, clutching the folder, and knocked on his door. "Enter," he said. She stepped inside and placed the file on his desk. "Sir, there are discrepancies in these reports." Alexander lifted an eyebrow. "Discrepancies?" She pointed to the altered numbers. "These are not clerical errors. Someone changed them intentionally." He leaned forward, scanning the pages with a tightening jaw. His left hand trembled again, but this time he clenched it to hide the movement. "Miss Reyes," he said, "do you realize what you are suggesting?" "I do," she answered quietly, "and I think someone is preparing to use this against you." The room seemed to still around them. He looked at her, and for a moment she saw more fear than anger in his eyes. "Who else knows about this?" he asked. "Only the people who created the documents," she said, "and now you." He closed the folder, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for bringing this to me." She hesitated. "Sir, you should not face this alone. If you confront the board with altered reports, it could be used as proof of negligence." Alexander stood abruptly, pacing once behind the desk. "They have been looking for a reason. If this is the reason, then—" "No," she said, stepping forward. "You are not letting them do this." He stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy but alive, as if the truth between them finally had space to breathe. Just then, a sharp knock echoed from the doorway. Lila turned to see the same tall board member from Friday standing there. His expression was polite, but his eyes were cold. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I would like a word, privately." Alexander straightened, slipping the mask of control back into place. "In a moment." The board member glanced briefly at Lila. The message was clear. He did not like her presence here. When he left, Lila looked at Alexander. "Sir, he is involved. I can feel it." Alexander exhaled slowly. "You should not be mixed in with this. It is not your fight." But she shook her head. "You are my boss, and more importantly, you are a person who has suffered enough. I will not let them destroy you." For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. The weight of her loyalty, unexpected and unwavering, settled into the quiet space between them. "Be careful, Lila," he said finally. "This could become dangerous." She met his gaze without fear. So could silence. And in that instant, something changed. Not just in their connection, but in the battle closing in around them. She had stepped onto the battlefield with him, and there was no going back. The board meeting at 3 o'clock carried the kind of tension that settled in the air like a storm waiting to break. Lila stood outside the conference room with the revised files pressed against her chest, her heartbeat echoing louder than the hallway footsteps around her. She had spent the last hour verifying every number, tracing every signature, and compiling a clear timeline that proved the truth. The reports had been altered intentionally, and not by Alexander. Inside the meeting room, voices rose and fell, muffled by the glass walls. Every few minutes, she caught a glimpse of Alexander at the head of the long table, posture straight, expression calm but strained. The board member who had watched her earlier leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes sharp with the certainty of someone who believed victory was already his. After what felt like an eternity, Alexander pressed the intercom button. "Miss Reyes, bring in the corrected documents." Lila inhaled deeply and stepped into the room. Every head turned toward her. She set the file on the table and opened it with steady hands. "These are the accurate financial reports," she said. "They include the original metadata and the altered versions with forged signatures. The discrepancies were created intentionally." A murmur rippled across the room. The board member leaned forward, his voice dripping disdain. "You expect us to believe the assistant discovered what our entire financial team missed?" Lila held his gaze. "I do not expect anything, sir. I am presenting facts." Before he could interrupt, Alexander spoke. "She is correct." The room fell silent. Alexander stood, bracing one hand on the table. His left wrist trembled slightly, but he refused to hide it. "Someone has been manipulating internal data for months," he said. "Miss Reyes uncovered proof that these changes were coordinated and linked to unauthorized access under your credentials." All eyes shifted to the board member. His expression cracked for a fraction of a second before he straightened in his chair. "This is ridiculous. She is a new assistant. What motive would I have to do something like that?" Alexander opened another folder, revealing financial transfers that Lila had traced earlier. A merger proposal that would benefit your private holdings. A decline in company performance would force a leadership vote. Convenient timing, is it not? The air thickened with shock. The chairman of the board leaned forward slowly. "Is this true?" The accused board member stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is a setup. You are desperate, Hale." But the evidence spoke louder than his anger. Security entered moments later at the chairman's command, escorting the man out as he protested loudly. When the door finally closed, the room exhaled in a collective silence. Alexander lowered himself into his chair, not out of defeat, but out of relief that looked almost unfamiliar on him. The chairman looked at him with a softened expression. "Mr. Hale, the board will support a full investigation, and it appears your assistant may be one of the most competent individuals in this building." A few members nodded, murmuring their agreement. The meeting adjourned soon after, and Lila gathered the documents with trembling hands. She had not realized how much adrenaline was carrying her until now. When the room emptied, Alexander approached her. "You saved me today," he said quietly. Lila shook her head. "I did what was right." He studied her, the sharpness in his eyes replaced by something warm, something open. "You stayed," he said. when others would have walked away, when I pushed you away, when it was dangerous for you. She felt her breath catch. I stayed because you deserved support. You deserved someone to see you. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The sunlight through the conference room window softened around them, turning the moment into something steady and real. Alexander stepped closer. "Lila," he said, his voice low, "I want to try to live, not just survive, and I want to try it with you." Her heart stilled, then opened. "Then we can take it one day at a time," she whispered. "Together." He let out a breath that sounded like the release of years of held pain. Then he reached for her hand, not with force, but with quiet hope. Outside the windows, the city continued its constant hum, unaware that something monumental had shifted inside the building. A ruthless CEO had finally allowed himself to heal, and the stubborn, clumsy assistant who refused to leave had become the one person he could not imagine losing. Thank you for listening. Comment yes if you would like a bonus epilogue or the next healing romance story.